Hello and welcome to this commemorative edition of Destination Midway, honoring Women's History Month with our special salute to women in the military, trailblazers in triumph. I am Karl Zingheim, the staff historian for the USS Midway Museum, and today we're coming from the wardroom of the USS Midway where the officers dined. Joining us today will be a quartet of accomplished women who chose the Navy as their service, and we're going to engage in an extended discussion as to what they learned from their time in the Navy and how they've applied that into their lives. Like before, all of our webcasts are going to be interactive, and so if you feel like you need to contribute some questions or some commentary, please feel free to use the chat box option, and we'll include it in our program. If you'd like to make a donation to the Midway Museum, please visit our website at www.midway.org. For those who have already made a donation, we greatly appreciate it. We are going to be commencing our talk today by introducing four women who chose the Navy as their service voluntarily and have learned how to deal with life's pressures by learning from what the Navy had to offer, as well as some of the unusual occurrences that have to be contended with when you're a woman in the armed services. We begin today by introducing Captain Veronica Armstrong-Evans to our left. She enlisted as a hospital corpsman and specialized as a radiology technologist. She eventually earned her college degree and received a regular commission in the Nurse Corps. She also had tours not only in various naval hospitals, but aboard the hospital ship Mercy and on the staff of the Medical Inspector General. A highlight of her career was a leadership position she had in 3 multilateral humanitarian outreach projects into the Central and South Pacific, as well as Vietnam and the Philippines. She also served on the staff of the Medical Inspector General. Today, in her retirement, she devotes herself to volunteer projects and is currently sitting on the board of directors for the USS Midway Museum. She is also the chair of the Midway's own Diversity and Inclusion Committee. Sitting right next to her is Captain Dee Jacobs. She grew up as a Navy junior and decided to join the Navy and received a commission in the line officer community through Officer Candidate School. Her tour included various assignments to shore stations across the western United States, Hawaii, and the Philippine Islands. She attained her postgraduate degree and published a work on international relations in the Far East during the early post-Cold War era. She also had tours with the National Defense University, the Naval Academy, the Naval War College, and the Pentagon. She also enjoyed 2 command tours in the Pacific Northwest as well as Naval Station Guam. Presently, she is involved in the faculty at the Rady School of Management at the University of California, San Diego, but immediately after her retirement, she embarked upon a second career as the Chief Executive Officer for the San Diego Girl Scouts. Right next to her is Command Master Chief Valissa Tisdale. She began her career actually in the ship's serviceman rating before transitioning over to the Master at Arms rating. Her career has taken her to all kinds of ship and service, shore service destinations, including 3 submarine tenders, 3 aircraft carriers, the naval support activity in Bahrain, and she provided the senior enlisted leadership for the Strategic Weapons Facility in Bremerton, Washington. Upon completion of her Command Master Chief training, she served in that capacity in Japan at the Naval Air Station in Lemoore, California, as well as in Guam. And she is currently now an active duty Command Master Chief for the Commander Naval Region Southwest. And finally, we have retired Commander Karen Brasch, who came from a long line of veterans herself and decided to join naval aviation. She eventually qualified in flying the H-60 Seahawk and mastered all of its mission parameters, including combat search and rescue as well as anti-submarine warfare. During her career, she helped enforce the no-fly zone that had been imposed upon Iraq after the original Gulf War and has flown support operations as well in ongoing operations in both Afghanistan and in Iraq. Today, she is the Senior Business Director for Business Management at Safara, which is a firm that specializes in bringing artificial intelligence to transportation safety. She's also involved in many volunteer projects, including educating people who are having to cope with certain autoimmune disorders as well as cancer, and she's currently co-producing a documentary on the World War II era Women's Air Force Service Pilot WASP program. Welcome aboard, ladies, to the Midway. Okay, since the Navy Nurse Corps is the longest continuous program involving women in the Navy, we'll start with Captain Armstrong-Evans. And the first thing we'd like to know really is, what drew you into military medicine, of all things, and particularly when you went to that very challenging specialty as a radiology technologist?
So it's very interesting. I started out, my family had a history of military service. It was mostly guys, and they were mostly Army and Marine Corps. And so when I decided to join, I was 17, and my recruiter came to my house on Sunday because I thought my mom would be most likely to sign without a challenge. It didn't work. She made him wait until I came home from church. But I planned to come in for 4 years because I liked the uniform, the little seersucker uniform also. And by the time I came in, that uniform was no longer a part of it. So I was going to come in for 4 years, save some money, see the world, and get out and go to college. And then I realized I could do everything I wanted to do while on active duty, and I actually accomplished that while on active duty. Radiology tech was something I'd written in 9th grade. When you have to do one of those autobiographies, I said, I'll join the Navy, I'll be an EKG tech or an X-ray tech, and then I'll go to nursing school. And it actually happened that way, so I'm pretty fortunate.
Well, in the Nurse Corps, how did your duties transform when you went from being a hospital corpsman and you got your college education and finally received a commission? How did the work in Navy medicine change for you?
So, Navy medicine is very collaborative. As a nurse, we need the techs, we need the docs. So it's a team effort. And so as a Nurse Corps officer, it was just more collaborative. Your scope increases a bit, and you get to impact others and show them that it can be done. I grew up in small town Georgia, and so to join the Navy after high school, to get the education, to get a commission. You're also role modeling and helping others to come along. So the scope increases and your area of influence increases.
Fantastic. Captain Jacob, how did your experiences growing up in a Navy family influence, if at all, your intention to actually join the Navy yourself?
I think the fact that my dad was a World War II submariner shielded me from the anti-Vietnam protests at my college and around the country. Is that they would say, all these military people are baby killers, and I thought, no, they're not. They're like my dad. So while nobody in my graduating class joined the military voluntarily, I did because I knew they were good people and they were fun things to do. And I think I certainly was not influenced by my father to join the military, but he at least was the person that I could hold up as a role model, that military people are good people. They're kind and they want to make the world a better place. They're educated, they're smart. They're not what you say on campus.
Now, you received your commission as an unrestricted line officer at a time when women were not commonly sent to sea duty, and if they were, it was basically hospital ship duty. So how could you embark upon an unrestricted line community when you're basically going to shore stations at that time?
Well, you're absolutely right. Unrestricted, we were very, very restricted. We certainly could not fly. I admire that so much. And there was no even going on hospital ships. That women were not allowed at sea in the air. But what happened during the all-volunteer force, they couldn't man the military, so they womaned it. And the United States brought on a lot of women. In fact, in my year, they went from 1% of the force to 3% of the force with women. That was a lot of women. Still very, very small compared to the men, but they were bringing in a lot of women because they didn't have enough men volunteers.
What was really interesting, too, is that women could enlist in the peacetime Navy beginning in 1948. But getting a direct commission in the Navy services really had to wait until the 1970s. And then, of course, there was the long, drawn-out waiting period to receive assignment to surface ships, non-combatants, and then another long wait to be able to pursue your career as a surface officer on combatant ships. And it's only recently that the Navy has now permitted women to serve on submarines. So there is a definitive progression there for women who are in the unrestricted line. Turning over to active duty here, well, we turn to Command Master Chief Valissa Tisdale. And what career options did you have when you first enlisted? Did you really have a burning desire to enter the ship's serviceman rate at the get-go?
No, I did not. Actually, when I first joined at 17, like you, I was going to be an electrician.
Oh.
But, you know, you have to wait your turn to leave for boot camp. So they had me slated to go to boot camp in October. And coming from a small town in Mississippi, I was like, I have to get out of here. So I called the recruiter, and they did the paperwork, so I was able to leave in July. But that meant I couldn't get that A school quota. So it was either be a boatswain mate or be a ship serviceman. And since my brother was already in the Navy for a couple of years, he was like, absolutely not boatswain mate. He was like, you will hate it because I know you. So I was like, okay, then ship serviceman it is. So that's how I ended up as a ship serviceman at first.
Okay, what kind of duties did you perform? I believe your first sea duties were on a series of submarine tenders in the SH rate. So what exactly were you expected to do when you were assigned to these ships?
Well, when you first go to a ship, they automatically put you in the ship's laundry. And I didn't like that at all because it was hot down there. And I was like, I have to do something to get out of here. So I started working in the ship stores and eventually went to barber school. And before I cross-rated over, I was a ship's barber.
And you just decided to try to spend as much time in the barber assignment as possible.
Yes.
Now, for many people, it would probably be considered a great leap to go from the ship serviceman rating with what you had to do with the normal shipboard duties to the Master-at-Arms rating that you eventually settled upon. What drew you, of all things, to what amounts to Navy law enforcement?
It's funny what happened with that. As a ship serviceman, I just knew I knew my job. And it took me a while. I took the first class exam 5 times, and I was getting close to making first class, but I just couldn't meet the mark. And my chief came in and just gave me what we call PARs and said, okay, you're changing rate to MA. I was like, oh, wow, he's kicking me out of the rate. What did I do? You know, so he was like, no, I've seen your test scores. You're scoring very, very high, but they're not promoting enough, so you need to cross rate over. And I was like, okay, chief. And I started doing OJT with the Master-at-Arms on base in Meridian. And they signed off on my paperwork. And a couple months later, I was transferred over to being an MA.
So you really had no intention or outlook. So just like when you wound up in the SH rate, it's just being at the right place at the right time.
Absolutely.
It's amazing how often that seems to apply in life, both
Yes.
inside and outside of the military.
Yes.
Well, let's turn over to Commander Brasch and talking about your experiences in naval aviation. First off, why would you select naval aviation of all things, considering that it is not exactly a safe program? It does have its own hazards, and how on earth did it even lead to the path in rotary wing aviation?
Started when I was 9. My dad was an Air Force fighter pilot, and so growing up at the time, there was just 3 of us girls, and I was the one most interested in flying. We used to go out to the airfield. I had every model airplane and the USS Enterprise, of course, painted gold that we had built hanging from my ceiling, and I was reading Learn How to Fly books back then. And I decided I was going to be a pilot, and then went to college in South Texas and completely switched gears. I was going to be an advertising executive, and I met a friend of mine who was in the Navy and got me into one of the flight simulators, and that changed everything. And I was like, I'm going to be just like that, going to go fly for the Navy. And then going through flight school, you go through the whole program, and they bring out different aircraft. And at the time, we were allowed to go out, see the aircraft, hear the aircrew talk about what it is they did, the different pilots. And there was a search and rescue crew, and I was very interested in the combat search and rescue mission. And that's how I eventually ended up selecting helicopters.
Now, you, of course, are working on a documentary on a World War II era program of the Women's Air Force Service Pilots, which meant that in World War II, women actually did fly high-performance combat aircraft in the United States. It was just for training and delivery purposes only. And so naval aviation did not accept women until 1974. So it's rather far down the back, even post-Vietnam. And then, even then, it was only in non-combatant roles. So it was nearly another 20 years before women were finally allowed to enter tactical aviation. And that was probably about the time that you were entering.
Exactly the time I entered, ironically. Yeah, exactly the time.
So what was the environment then for women aviators coming into the tactical aviation environment for the very first time?
It's what you would expect. A lot of folks don't like change, shocking. Backing up to, you know, how I got to that part with we were talking about the Red Door Films is doing the Fly Girls documentary miniseries, and I'm their veteran liaison, one of their veteran liaisons, and that's how I got involved because of the when 1993, I think it was, they passed that women could now fly in combat and be unrestricted line actually on the ships. I was in aviation officer candidate school at that time, so you're OCS, you're OCS. And I remember very clearly sitting, I think we were in PT training at the time, and they came through and the drill instructor announced to everybody that women could now fly in combat. And it was pretty quiet in the larger group. After that, we got to hear about how the women were all going to steal the men's pilot slots. And that's how it started. I mean, that was the initial, that went away pretty quick. And so as we started deploying, it was weird for them to have women on board the aircraft carriers. I was on the first deployment for the Nimitz when they had women on board. And so it was definitely, you could see them going through the adjustment of having women there. By the second tour deployment that I had, it was completely normal. It didn't seem odd at all.
Now, naval aviators, of course, are a completely different community. It's a Navy within the Navy, and being a black shoe myself, I've had to learn this the hard way. So please explain to us what ready room life was like in that transitional period as well.
It was also, okay, so again, the two deployments were very different. The first deployment, when they weren't used to having women in there, they weren't exactly sure what to do with us, and it was way before the world of political correctness, although I was pretty lucky. I thought it went overall with nothing to compare it to. I thought it was fine. I was just super excited to be there, and I was willing to, you know, deal with any of the craziness that happened. But for the most part, it was if you could do your job, it was good. And I think I showed up at the squadron. I think I showed up in my Class A's, my khaki uniform, heels and all, not thinking anything that it would be odd, and showed up, and I was the first female in the squadron when I came in. And apparently the aircrew had gone to my commanding officer. This is the story the aircrew tells me much later, by the way. So they had gone to my commanding officer and said, "We are not going to fly the female pilot." And so my commanding officer turned around to them and said, "Congratulations, she is now your division officer," which means then they all had to report to me for the whole deployment. And honestly, it came down to, once they could see that I could fly and do my job, all the other stuff went away. It's just fear of change, fear of the unknown. They're not used to it, but once people got used to it, it wasn't questioned anymore. And this, like I said, the second deployment, we were fully integrated by then, and it was just do your job.
Wonderful. That's a wonderful explanation of how things transitioned. For those of you who are joining us, we are conducting a special commemorative webcast of Destination Midway, saluting women in the military. If you have any questions or comments you'd like to contribute, we'd love to include them in our program, so please feel free to use the chat box feature. Returning to the Navy Nurse Corps, one of your assignments, Veronica, was with the Navy Medical Inspector General's office. What on earth is an Inspector General?
So the Navy Medical Inspector General is through the Bureau of Medicine and Surgery, and now transitioning to Defense Health Agency. But that was when I was on active duty on my last assignment. The purpose of the Medical Inspector General, or MedIG for short, is twofold. There is a compliance component to it, and there's an investigative component to it. The compliance has to do with higher echelon policies to keep our people safe, and to ensure we're doing the right thing. And the investigative component is to give everyone a voice, so that if you have an issue or a concern, there are avenues for having those concerns addressed. And so that's the investigative piece of it. But twofold, wonderful opportunity.
One thing that really was notable about recent Navy medicine history, that there were a series of scandals, malpractice being performed by Navy medicine on personnel that even led to congressional testimony and investigations in the 1980s. Was your involvement with the Inspector General's office about coincident with that time, or was there any kind of stepping up of Inspector General activities because of this?
I can't respond to that part because I was on the compliance side of the Medical Inspector General. The investigative side has a different team, and so they would know more about those activities. It's very clean. You keep the two very separate as to not influence anyone.
So for compliance then, you would basically be serving the same type of role that we have in the operating Navy with refresher training or other kinds of material service inspections.
Yes, somewhat, some of those, and then you, and so once again, it's transitioning. The role of the Medical Inspector General now is a bit different than when I was on active duty in 2016 to 19 is when I was on the team. So with the transition to Defense Health Agency, the role of the Medical Inspector General is changing. So programs that I inspected were sexual assault prevention and awareness, alcohol, the DAPA program, and other programs like that that deliver, that check to see, are we taking care of our service members? So, and a variety of other programs, but certainly the compliance side to see that we're doing the right thing.
Wonderful. Jody, you had some very successful career tours in and out of the recruiting field, including being able to turn around an entire district and making it #1 in the Navy. What was it about the recruiting field that really seemed to appeal to you?
I loved recruiting. Recruiting gives you real hardcore life skills, and so many times in a Navy career, it is not transferable to civilian careers. If you're a pilot, you can go fly for American Airlines. But mostly, you don't get the hardcore skills. But in the recruiting, you learn sales, which I would advocate for everybody. Everybody needs to learn how to sell themselves in their life. So I love the stories in recruiting. I love the people. And certainly in those days, and I'm sure now, recruiting command always got the best people. So I had a team of, I think we had 130 recruiters. They were just rock stars in all of their different ratings. I learned so much more about the Navy, all of the officer programs and the enlisted programs. I just learned a lot about the Navy.
And so would you say that also helped you as well in other types of assignments that you had after you'd had concluded your respective recruiting tours?
Absolutely, Wayne. I would say after going to recruiting officer management school, I used those skills every single day of my life since then. So I am so grateful to recruiting, and it's a tough job, but if you learn skills of sales, it just helps you forever.
Interesting. You also, of course, later in your career, moved over into policy making at headquarters in the Pentagon, the Office of the Secretary of the Navy. How would you compare being in the operating Navy as opposed to being in the policy making part of the service?
You compliment me. By no means was I making policy. I was carrying somebody's bag who was making policy. It was a great honor to work for Secretary of Defense Perry, way below him, just to see how great people in our national command structure do make policy. So I learned so very, very much. I will always regret not saving this little piece of paper that became the blueprint for the Dayton Accords during the Bosnia War. And right in front of me, my boss, who was the Assistant Secretary of Defense, and another gentleman, were taking a map of Bosnia and dividing it. And this bridge goes over here. And this little piece of paper, I had to actually burn because it was top secret, and but it went on to be the blueprint for the Dayton Accord. So that's how policy is made, at a very, very rudimentary, back of the envelope level, on up to eventually national policy.
Interesting. So basically, you, by dint of your assignment to these offices, got to have a glimpse into how diplomacy really occurs. Did that influence your research when you produced that work on the relations between Russia and Japan after the end of the Cold War?
Yes, that was a great opportunity. The Navy gave me the opportunity to spend a year in a think tank in Washington, D.C. called American Enterprise Institute, and I was partnered with a scholar in Japan and wrote that piece with him.
Fantastic. Lisa, could you explain what a Command Master Chief is really all about? This is something that was inherited, by the way, by the submarine force. They were the ones who introduced senior enlisted leadership with the Chief of the Boat program before World War II, and it was finally extended to the rest of the fleet in 1958. But most of us really don't have any idea of what a Command Master Chief is really all about.
Well, we're pretty much responsible for everything dealing with the enlisted sailors. And of course, we also help officers to, help, whatever they have going on. But we're responsible to the commanding officer for all enlisted matters. If a sailor is having a problem that they need help with, we're the ones that get them together to go fix that problem. If they're personal or professional, we're in charge of their careers, helping them get their careers online and keep their careers online. And I tell them all the time, I'm in the business of helping sailors promote. My relief is out there somewhere, so I got to make sure that person is ready to take over when it's time for me to retire. So as the senior enlisted leader, you could say that we're, their parents away from home, because we have to make sure they're taken care of. Make sure we let them know that something is a problem before they realize it's a problem. And if they have that problem, they have someone to come to and talk to and get it straight.
Do you really see this as an outgrowth of having to rely entirely on a volunteer military service?
No, it is. I think having to rely on people that volunteer to come in and to help someone else out, I think it just shows pride in your job, what you do. You want to do it, because I didn't have to become a Command Master Chief.
Right.
I did it because I think I owe it to the sailors to help them to get them to where they need to be. So I think being an all volunteer, people are going to have their issues regardless. They're going to have problems. They come in with issues, but they have that senior leadership there to help them with those issues and get them on the right track. So that's what I love doing.
Could you explain what you're doing at your level? Because there are various levels of command and having Command Master Chiefs, and clearly you're reaching the pinnacle of this arrangement. What is it that you're doing now differently at the regional level as a CMC that you would not have been doing, say, at the squadron or at some other command level? Okay.
Actually, I'm just, like now I have 10 installations up and down the California coast and in Nevada, have Fallon. So what I do now that's different is I don't interact directly with the sailors anymore. I have Command Master Chiefs that interact with their sailors, and if it gets up to my level, if they can't handle something, then that's when I step in to provide that oversight for them. I make sure that the policy that the region commander sets, that my bases are following that. And if they have any issues with that, then I take that and I go back to the region commander with it so we can solve those issues. So I'm not directly dealing with the amount of sailors that I used to. I have about 80 sailors here at the region, but nowhere near what I'm used to at an installation or at a squadron.
Sounds like you're inching closer to being part of that policy making.
Actually, yes.
Yeah. Veronica, one of the interesting things that really came out with your bio is the fact that you were involved in 3 separate extraordinary humanitarian programs that were multilateral and involved working with foreign governments. So could you briefly summarize what it was, the work that you did in all these remote areas in the Central Pacific atolls and the South Pacific as well as the Far East?
Yeah, I pretty much describe those places we went as all the places you see when you're watching Survivor. Vanuatu, Tonga, Papua New Guinea. I actually had the opportunity to go to Papua New Guinea twice, which is, once is unheard of, and going twice is just more than you ever imagine. Fiji, Vietnam, the Philippines, Federated States of Micronesia, So a lot of different opportunities to get into a country or a nation and work alongside their personnel, their medical staff for the most part. But we also had other services on board the ship. So when we started the mission, we had the MAs that would teach law enforcement. We had the builders, the CBs, and we also had partner nations. So you'd have partner nations and the U.S. forces. We get together, we go into a country or a nation and help them build, check out their water supplies, their water sources, and get those corrected to fight some of the diseases. We talked about humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, which is really the major portion of it, to help those countries learn or to work with them so that we could all better respond to a disaster and provide some of that humanitarian assistance. It was a wonderful opportunity, and if anybody wants to go, you can go as a volunteer when they're doing the mission. So there are lots of non-governmental organizations that offer opportunities for different specialties, not all medical, to go and participate in those missions. So
of course, this begs the question, because a lot of the places you served in were, in this program, were in the Southern Hemisphere. So did you have to go through the crossing the line ceremony? That's traditional?
Right. I'm a golden shellback.
There you go.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Congratulations on
Thank you.
that. Karen, coming back to you, you completed your time flying helicopters for the Navy and transitioned into civilian life, but what about your experiences in naval aviation, you think, prepared you for the transition into the private sector?
Quite a few. I mean, the leadership is by far the thing that we learn the most, right? And I'll say too, kind of what Jody was talking about, you know, you get a lot from the people that you're working with. I wish I'd learned more of the sales. That would have been super handy in transition. I probably didn't take as much as I would like to have taken transition-wise. I wish there had been more on the transition side to help you transition from military to corporate world. But leadership, collaboration, teamwork, sacrifice, knowing how to really dig in when things got really hard, right? Because the one thing, and I do this with my teams now, you don't all have to like each other, but you need to respect each other to work, because we're not going to get the mission done unless we do it together. Because mission-oriented folks, we don't cross the finish line alone. And so that kind of leadership and empowering your people was the #1 thing I think I took. And crew coordination, right? I flew search and rescue, combat search and rescue, anti-submarine warfare. It took all 4 of us on board every single mission to get all 4 of us back. And so that was an important part of it. And I really learned to rely heavily on everybody's subject matter expertise. And the idea that, you know, it takes a team of mixed folks, right? So I always say at work, when you build a team of superheroes, you never get 6 Batmans, right? You gotta have somebody with an invisible jet, somebody with healing powers, but you learn that everybody that, in that case, you fly with, or everybody that you crew with, or everybody that you have a team, that you're part of a team, it's so important to be diverse and to have different backgrounds and to have different training and subject matter expertise. So I brought that.
Now, one thing you definitely took from the Navy is being mission-oriented. Does that give you any particular advantages in working for the for-profit private sector?
Definitely. I mean, in the sense of, for me, and I would say this for everybody, right? You want to have, feel like you're providing value and that you have a sense of purpose. I would say military folks, especially mission-oriented, we're trained that way. We see the results of what it looks like when you finish a job together. We all know the results of having to work hard, having to sacrifice. And taking that into the corporate world, I would say, or the for-profit sector, not everybody has the blessing to get that kind of training or background. And for some, it's just they don't know what they don't know, right? And so I think that's a huge difference.
And Jody, you have post-Navy experience in other sectors, first with a not-for-profit, with the Girl Scouts. Did you bring anything from the Navy that you thought would be very useful in working in that particular form of private sector?
Oh, absolutely, the leadership. I echo that. And I was actually so interested in Master Chief's story about the chief that took her aside and said, you need to do something different. She had no idea what great leadership that was. And I do strongly believe that everyone can learn leadership. I had a list of 12 leadership lessons that other people taught me that became my touchstone in Girl Scouts. So I was very blessed to go take off navy blue and put on Girl Scout green and work and be able to tell girls authentically that they can do something, because so many years in the Navy you couldn't do because you were a woman, or there were lots of brass ceilings, but I wanted to authentically tell young girls that you can do anything.
And have you been able to transport anything else you've accumulated in all your experiences you've had in getting into college academe?
Yes, absolutely. Right now I teach social entrepreneurship at UCSD, and we're teaching online now. And one of my concerns is that people are losing that ability to authentically talk to you eyeball to eyeball, because that's the best way to communicate. This is the way that young people, frankly, that's the way I communicate now. It's just, it's so much better to talk authentically to somebody with your eyes, and I spend a lot of time teaching that, because you need to spend time with people, not with paper.
Interesting. So you're starting to see that there is a 21st century component to the basics of even human interaction in all kinds of professional areas. One thing that's also interesting to touch upon, all as career women in the Navy, is what do you do with a marriage to a military spouse when you have your own career you have to pursue? How do you balance having two people in the marriage who have careers that need to be nurtured and pursued? Jody, would you like to comment on that?
Well, I've actually had the chance to talk to everybody, and you really have quite a good cross-section of experiences here. I'm the oldest. So in my time, it was almost impossible to have a career and a family. You just couldn't. There were some bright, shining exceptions, but the reason I did not have children is because it was very clear I could not have a career and children. Later, women were allowed to get married, allowed to have babies, oh my gosh, allowed to have a pregnancy uniform, all of these wonderful changes that happened. So maybe the mom could address that one. Yeah?
Yeah, it's stressful sometimes, but you have to have that support system, and because if you don't have a strong support system, then it's going to wear on you, and it'll wear you down to whereas you feel like you have to leave the military because you have a family to take care of. I was very lucky that my mom and grandma were there with me with my child, and when I had to deploy, they pretty much let me know, if you take that kid anywhere else, we will disown you. So, you know, I took my kid home, so I was able to serve and do my job and make it up through the ranks. So I'd say that strong support system is what you really need to make sure your family is good and your career is good.
Interesting. Veronica, do you have anything to comment on the dual careerism?
So my husband was retired before we were married, and it was interesting because he was seagoing, so watching the ships that I was on push back, and he's standing on the pier and you're waving goodbye, was a very different experience for him. So he got to experience a lot of what the other spouses experience when the active duty member leaves, and so he was baptized by fire with that, literally by fire, because there was a fire at one of our homes, but a lot to do. So he certainly, I think, developed an appreciation for what spouses do after being the spouse to an active duty person that was always gone. Yeah.
Interesting, interesting. Karen, did you have any observations on this topic?
You know, I had my children after I was deploying active duty, so I was in the reserve. So I'll echo what I'm hearing, though, from them. It very much is that way. And the first two deployments, my husband at the time and I were both active duty, and we were just leapfrogging deployments. One of us would be home, one of us would be the spouse at home, one of us would be deployed, the other would be the spouse at home. And we did that for about 4.5 years, and I think it would have been really difficult with children. We just did not have kids at the time, so. But it's hard. I mean, it's hard for either spouse at home, but when you're trying to pull a dual military career, I mean, it's definitely more challenging than trying to pull a regular dual career, because at some point you could both get activated, and then you need that support system to somebody who's going to take care of the children. So there's a lot more to think about if you're doing dual military career.
As a follow-up, how do you have a conversation with a detailer when there's not just one career to make adjustments to, but there's someone else you have to take into account? How accommodating is the Navy to being able to allow two active service members to go where they need?
At the end of the day, I always remember they're orders, not invitations. That said, I would say, particularly in my early days, detailers were amazingly cooperative. They actually, if you're both good performers, they don't want to lose either one of you. So they would try to keep us together, and we were lucky for 15 years. At that point, though, when Glenn got orders to Norfolk and I got orders to Seattle, he retired. So at some point, you do have to choose.
So it sounds like there really are some stresses that can be insurmountable in trying to maintain two careers, let alone having a family at the same time.
I would say the detailers worked really hard to keep the families together. I was very impressed, even back when they had just said women could fly, right? They were still, I felt the detailers worked really hard to do that.
Well, thank you for this portion here. We'd like to be able to now open up to our own audience here to see if there are any kind of questions they'd like to ask our panelists or any kind of observations they'd like to share. Okay, Angelica asks, and this is for Jody, how did her time in the Navy help her with roles outside of the military, like her role as CEO of San Diego and Imperial Girl Scouts? So this is kind of a tie-off on what we'd asked earlier.
There are so many similarities. People say, how did you transition from the Navy to Girl Scouts? I said, well, you wear uniforms, you salute the flag, you camp, and frankly, Girl Scouts are far better behaved than sailors. So.
Well, that's the other thing, too, is that you are in an environment where you do have to deal with youngsters and their own priorities, both in the military and in scouting. Okay, are there any other questions or comments? Lori asks, I guess this is a general question, did you have female family members in the service prior to your own turns in the Navy?
I didn't.
Karen did.
I had both my grandmother and my great aunt served during World War II. My grandmother, they're both nurses, and my great aunt actually was a war hero, and I remember growing up and reading a book about her from the Battle of Bataan on the island of Corregidor, and she was in that as one of the nurses. And there's a whole book about her and a movie that was done in black and white. It's called So Proudly We Hail. Highly recommend it.
Awesome.
Right. That's my aunt.
Awesome. Any other questions from our audience? They're trying to think of what they'd like to ask. Well, one general question we could certainly put out for a roundtable discussion is, you've all committed the best part of your lives in many respects to service to this nation. What do you think that your time in your various assignments brings to the rest of your life and the things that you're doing now? Veronica, would you like to start on that?
Sure. I think my service and the time that I spent on active duty just brings a nice, healthy balance and an appreciation for how we are, who we are as a nation, and how we strive to be at our best, how we work together, and to help our allies. So that's really important. And you go home and you just engage in the community, which is why it's nice to be back and to be out of the uniform and then able to volunteer, because that's what we are. We are a nation of volunteers.
Yes, we are. Jody, what do you think all your time in uniform has brought to what your outlook would be for the rest of your life?
In a simple sentence, it would be, thank you for your service. When people find out that you served, they thank you. And I said, what a transformation from the day of Vietnam's, when soldiers would come back and be spat on and be hated and be violently accosted. And now people say, thank you for your service. And my response is, it was a great honor.
Yeah, Lisa, what would you like to contribute to that?
My time in, I think, teaches me how to, like you said, work with people and wanna volunteer to help. It teaches me how to prioritize and make sure I'm working on what's important, what matters. So I think when I finally retire, I will do a lot of volunteer service and help people and try to talk to people and try to encourage, you know, the positive in people. So.
Well, I think you've got some great role models to live up to and all kinds of contacts to make when you do make that transition. Hopefully it won't be too soon.
No.
Karen, what do you think the Navy can do for the rest of your life?
Well, I'm going to echo everything they said and add on what I learned, I think, especially for deploying and being, you know, stuck on a ship for 600 people, you know, for 6 months at a time, how different everybody is. You know, I grew up in, you know, the same state, went to college in the same state, and I just didn't realize how different people were out there. And what I really learned was the appreciation. So I purposely look for opportunities to surround myself with diverse people all around, just because of what I learned from the different countries and the people that I served with, that sense of community and how important that is, no matter what the community, right? But you build that community and you build your circle of trust and you build your circle of friends. And to me, that's probably one of the biggest aha moments I had, was learning how different everybody was and how much more fun I thought that was for me. Yeah, so.
Very well said. And so we have another question here from Amanda, and she would like to ask, what advice would you give a young woman interested in joining the military? It's an excellent question. Veronica, would you like to touch on that one first?
Sure. A young woman joining the military, I think your options are unlimited. You can do or be anything you want to be in the military. You know, the opportunities that you have, find out what you enjoy, and then move forward with that. And if you do join, or if you are in, it's someone's job to help you be successful. So whether it's your chief or your command master chief or your division officer or department head, once you are in and you say, hey, this is what I want to do, someone should help you to achieve those goals. That was my experience, and it was the right thing to do. So I feel the options are unlimited for a young woman or any person joining the military.
Lisa, what would be your perspective on answering that question?
I would say the same thing. Just be heard. You know, if you want something, talk to somebody about it. Ask the question. I mean, nothing is, you know, out of your reach. If you want a certain job, just go and talk to someone, because we don't know what we don't know, and we can't help you if we don't know what's going on. So join the military. The possibilities are endless.
Karen, how about this?
I'm going to also echo those, because I think that having mentors is so important. And I will also say, know who you are. So if you're a young woman thinking about joining the military, or probably for anything, this is good advice, but know who you are and be confident, but be willing to learn and grow, and find the right people to help you learn and grow. It's the people that you surround yourself with are the people that you want to aspire to be, right? So look around your crowd and figure out, are those the people I want to be, or is that a different group? But also really kind of knowing who you are and having a solid sense of self. And I think that takes a while, but I think it's really important to start that journey and then learn and grow.
And finally, let's turn to the professional recruiter on our panel. And what advice would you have for young women considering joining today's military?
I will lean forward and say, get a skill. Get a hard skill. Watch the movie Flashdance. That woman is a welder, and she's making some money. And in today's economy, the welders, the electricians, the plumbers, the aircraft mechanics, they have a skill that can transfer to civilians. And Walter's a great photographer, but don't join the Navy and think you're going to be a photographer or a public affairs officer. Get a hard skill that's transferable.
Thank you. And on behalf of our viewers, I would like to thank each and every one of you for the dedication to your service and to our nation. And without people like you working alongside the men who are in our armed services, we wouldn't be able to accomplish half the things that we do to this day. Also, I'd like to thank our viewers for supporting our program. And if you'd like to make a contribution to the USS Midway Museum, please visit our website at www.midway.org. If you've already made a donation, we really appreciate your generosity. Please also check our website to follow our social media to learn more about the next episode of Destination Midway, and visit the Karl's Corner blog for additional information. Before I conclude, I also would like to be able to introduce a special tribute video to women in the military that was produced courtesy of the Midway's own Committee for Diversity and Inclusion. Thanks for watching. Thank you for joining us today in our special commemorative edition of Destination Midway, and please check back to see our next upcoming episode. Thank you very much.